Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy, Jack Slack, the supplemented taint of MMA's human body, and this is the Fights Gone By podcast, episode 44. We're coming at you on the 5th of July, and it's a scorchingly hot day here in the UK, and I'm drinking a piping hot cup of tea so that I'll feel the benefit, as your nan would always say. Always have a hot drink in hot weather, you'll feel the benefit. Been a slow one this week, no real fights on. The World Series of Fighting rebrand did their first event. John Fitch choked some guy without the hooks in, and the choke didn't even really look like it was in when he finished the fight, but, in the middle of a racetrack apparently, which seems like Coker-esque promotion. Talking of Scott Coker, let's get on to the news. First things first, Cyborg versus Anderson is off. This happened during the week. Both was signed and then called off. Christian Justino Cyborg was going to fight Megan Anderson of Invicta fame, of 7-fight fame. But Anderson's pulled out, and Cyborg's opponent is now Tonya Evinger, who is, I believe, the Invicta 135 champion. She's bantamweight. And she's had a real, career resurgence in recent years. Not really losing except for the one, which was a controversial decision, and she actually got it overturned. She's the rare example of an athletic commission admitting that they made a mistake. Normally, appealing against an athletic commission is wasting your time and money. But she pulled it off, so then she could really pull off this fight, if her luck holds up. Lots of people counting her out already. I mean, she is a 135er, but the way that this works is that anytime you see an accomplished 135er put in with Cyborg, they're automatically like her second best opponent ever already. The thing holding up Cyborg's record as the strongest 145er in the world is her 2 wins over Marlis Kunin, who is really a 135er who just didn't like cutting weight. And the best dressed woman in MMA, if you ask me. Which she did. Classy lady. So yeah, Evinger could pull it off, or she could get mauled in the process, but she's scrappy as anything, so should be a decent fight. And to be honest, Megan Anderson's the person with the best chance of being the big thing at 145, because she is 6 feet tall, actually weighs in at the weight, and looks fairly good in her fights. And has the quite slick striking, so she has the chance to be the future of 145. I would just like some time to build her up a little bit first. Really, the training is going to be more important than the fights at this point, because there is almost no one to fight at 145, unless they get Julia Budd in, or someone like that. Anyway, returning to Scott Coker, he has announced that Michael Venom Page versus Paul Daley will happen in 2018, and in the meantime, MVP is going to box. Why? Should be the question on everyone's lips. Classic Scott Coker. Classic MVP. I am bored of waiting for this guy to fight someone decent. I mean, Fernando Gonzalez was fairly decent in terms of the Bellator rankings, but he was a foot shorter and a foot shorter in reach, and it was still a really boring fight where nothing happened. So I would like to see MVP in against anyone of even marginal note at this point. And I've been saying this for the last 2 years. So, lesson learned, don't get excited for Michael Venom Page fights ever, because if there's an interesting one, it's probably going to be either called off or scrapped in favour of something else. And final piece of news for this week, DJ vs. Borg is on. So get hyped for that. And the way Dana White announced it was serves you right, we're doing DJ vs. Borg, let's see how low the ratings are. Which, people are getting angry about it, and I just can't understand it. You know what Dana White does. It's like getting angry at Roger Stone's tweets, or Katie Hopkins if you're in the UK. It's what they do. They want you to be angry. And you, if you are the kind of fool who goes, I'll show him, I'm going to buy this event twice. That just works better for him. Support DJ, but DJ versus Borg is not an interesting fight. He just wants the record, and, who can blame him? I offered to take over running the Flyweight division 2 years ago. UFC never took me up on it, but I'd have fixed this shit by now. There are now rumours of the UFC selling off the Flyweight division, sell it to Bellator and see if you can weigh them down, because the sad fact is that they haven't worked out how to make the flyweight division even marginally interesting to someone who doesn't already know who all the actors in it are. You have to sit down 2-3 hours early, watch all the prelims to even know who the fuck any of these guys are. And they are, there's some great fighters down there. And it diminishes from what DJ's actually accomplished that he is fighting people that the regular person, the regular MMA fan doesn't know. You could watch all the main cards and still think that DJ's just been put in with nobodies because all the moving and shaking's on the undercard. But yeah, well, that's my regular flyweight rant. To be honest, at this point, I would rather the UFC just got rid of it, because if another organisation can do it better, great, they can just buy all the talent back. And if they can't, at least DJ can go on like a world tour and do Shuto and whatever else is left. Rising. Horiguchi's out in Rising, and he's entering their Bantamweight Grand Prix. I didn't even know that until this week. I saw that he was matched against Hideo Tokoro, who is so far past his prime that it's untrue. Really crafty grappler. Went to a draw with Royce Gracie, but then who hasn't? Despite a massive size disadvantage against Royce Gracie. Knocked out Pequeno, which is why he's famous. Antonio something Nogueira. Alexander Franco Nogueira. I forget his name, but the great featherweight before we had real featherweights. Famous for his guillotine, but Tokoro knocked him out with a spinning back fist and has been famous ever since. But the Japanese love him. He's just far past his prime. But he did have a Fight of the Year contender. I think it was last year, maybe the year before, in Bellator. Was it Bellator or World Series of Fighting? But he turned up in an American show and put on this barnstormer of a fight, which was really surprising given his age and the ring, the miles on him. However, putting him in with Kyoji Horiguchi, probably going to get him murdered. Kyoji Horiguchi, obviously a natural flyweight, but fought at bantamweight before that, so he's not a stranger to the weight class. But they have only announced like 6 of the contenders. They're having 12 people in their tournament, and they've only announced 6, which is a bit weird. You kind of want everything announced up front so you can get excited for it. But if they announce the second bracket or whatever they're doing at the next event, chances are someone would have dropped out before that time. So they're holding their cards close to their chest. And Japanese MMA, no one expects it to be above board and transparent anyway. Anyway, we've got fuck all to recap this week, so let's go straight into the lesser of this weekend's events. UFC Die or Show, whichever one's minor. Michael Johnson versus Justin Gaethje is the headliner. We'll talk a bit about some of the... Actually, no, we'll go straight into that, because I think I touched on this last week, because I thought it was the only thing going on this week, actually, until I realised it was 2 events on one weekend. International Fight Week! As they're calling it over there. Headliner is Michael Johnson versus Justin Gaethje, which is a great fight. Justin Gaethje is the most exciting man in MMA. If World Series of Fighting had kept him, and somehow convinced him to fight on every card, they could have put him in against nobodies, and you'd still have the most exciting fight, because he will get hit clean by almost anyone, but he can seem to turn anyone's world inside out if he hits them. Tremendous hitter, tremendous wrestler, Division 1 wrestler. If you read his thoughts on wrestling, it's really interesting, because he was talking about why he doesn't go to his wrestling all the time, and he said, I used to wrestle 7-minute matches, I'm in 25-minute matches now. If I wrestled, you'd see me wrestle for 7 and then I'd be dead. So that's why he only really goes to the big slams occasionally. He'll just pepper them in. But he does a great job of ducking in for a takedown level change, and then he'll come up with the uppercut, knock down Palomino with one of those, hurt a lot of guys with them. But if you notice, one thing that's interesting to me about Gaethje is that he does a lot of catch and pitch. He'll put his forearms up and his head down and take him on the top of the head, which, that is going to give you brain damage over the long haul, but being hit a lot, this is the thing I'm trying to get across to people this week, because Gaethje's fighting, being hit a lot is not an indication that your style doesn't work. It's an indication that your style relies on physical attributes, and that is going to get you in trouble one day. But, think about Ricky Hatton versus Costa Tszyu. Costa Tszyu, much better boxer, but Ricky Hatton was in his face all night, just grinding the soul out of him. And, Hatton at a later point in his career, if he did that to the same Costa Tszyu, probably would have got knocked out. But on that night, his chin and his body held up, and he just went all out after this guy. Not the most technical performance in the world, but he absolutely mauled him. And that's what you get with Justin Gaethje. You know, he does get hit a lot, and one day that chin will fail. It's exactly what I say about the Diaz brothers every time. One day their chin's going to fail, but you don't really want to be the guy relying on that if it hasn't already. You're not going to be like, I'm going to be the first guy to knock him out by hitting him square in the head, which a lot of guys do with the Diazes, and then find that because the Diazes are banging their body, because the Diazes are working them up and down with hundreds of punches, they can't load up on the big shots to the head anymore, and that game plan's out the window. If swing for his head and knock him out is a game plan, you know? But someone said, I uploaded one of his catch and pitch counters to Reddit as a GIF. Someone said that shit won't fly at the highest levels. And yeah, he could get knocked out, but the idea that catch and pitch, you know, covering up and then throwing back after they've hit your guard or the top of your head, the idea that doesn't fly at the highest levels is completely untrue. Remember Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor. Nate Diaz lost the first 2 rounds because he was reaching, trying to jab at Conor McGregor, and Conor McGregor was drawing him out and countering him. As soon as Diaz put his gloves right up on his head, you know, forearms up, forehead down, taking the punches on the top of his head, which is, you know, not good for you in the long term, but they're more likely to break their hands than you are to, like, you know, get cut or break your own face or whatever. Top of the head, really, if you watch something like Letway, that's the main thing that discourages people from punching more frequently. Anything bare knuckle, put the top of your head down and let them swing for it, because they're more likely to hurt their hand. But yeah, Diaz stole the middle rounds by just covering up and walking straight at McGregor. And McGregor would, you know, the harder McGregor sat down on his punches and you know, grit his teeth and tried to hit him as hard, the harder he's hitting, firstly, the top of Diaz's head or his guard, but also the longer he's there in the aftermath where Diaz can press in on him. And that's why that works. I mean, it will work at the top levels. The interesting thing about catch and pitch is that guys go to it, good guys tend to, well, good technicians tend to go to it as like a secondary thing, once their eyes start closing or if they can't keep up with the speed, as Diaz was struggling to. But the other time you see it is if guys don't have good eyes. Joe Frazier's a great example. You know, he moved his head a lot, but he wasn't like reacting to punches. He'd used the cross guard and he was just constantly bobbing. And it turned out, you know, we found out later that he was blind in one eye from like the 60s, you know, the early 60s, and then he was developing a cataract in the other eye that no one had ever picked up on. So he had something like 25% of his proper vision and was just going in there and still managing to counter people with these huge left hooks. Because basically, if you say, okay, he's hit me now, and you take it on either the guard or on the top of the head or whatever, you say he's hit me now, he's probably close enough that at least if I leap, I can get him. So yeah, I was wondering if Gaethje's eyes are as bad as they look when you see him wearing those big, thick rimmed glasses in any interview, because he doesn't really. You will see him do like the occasional slick counter, but he'll do it by like drawing the other guy forward and then slipping as they step in. You know, it's a big movement he's reacting to, and he knows that they're coming in. You won't typically see him slipping punches as he's moving forward or in punching range. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on, Gaethje's eyes, just over the long haul of his career. Now, the things that trouble a guy who comes straight forward and doesn't move his head a lot, typically straight shooters with lateral movement. Think like the 1970s? Yeah, 1970s US boxing team. The Russians were working on long punches to the body and looping punches, and the Americans were working on, well, I say Russians, the Soviets, the commies, no, the Eastern Bloc, USSR, that's the name I was looking for, or CCCP. They were working on long loopy blows, and the Americans were working on this lateral movement style with straight hitting in between. So where the Russians were making angles with their punches, the US was keeping the punches the same and changing the angles with the footwork. Generalizations, obviously, but just one of the patterns that you saw emerging through the boxing at the Olympics during that USSR-USA rivalry. And that's what Michael Johnson does a lot of. He does a lot of moving around and straight hitting. Does a little bit too much trading for my liking. But he also catches guys in trades, like Gleison Tibau. If you watch his sparring footage, he's game as anything. You know, there's sparring footage of him going several rounds with Nikki Holzkin, the great kickboxer, who was like the top in the world at the time. Has fallen off a little bit since then. Yeah, Johnson's just going after him and eventually gets dropped. They stop the camera as he's dropping, but it's a good round, actually. And one of the things he gets in against Holzken is the left straight. Yeah, left straight to the body, which he uses really nicely. I was just struggling to remember if Johnson was the southpaw there or Holzken, and I was going, Holzken's famous for his left hook, so it must be Johnson who's the southpaw. Yeah, Johnson's left straight to the body kept scoring that against Nicky Holzken. You know, he wasn't going super hard, but it was something that kept sneaking through, because Holzken's the kind of guy who puts his gloves up and walks forward. And Holzken himself doesn't use a lot of head movement. You know, he's got the forearms up, hiding behind the gloves, and then he'll walk you down and try and land the left hook to the body. So not a bad sparring partner in that sense, but that was quite a while ago. And then this time he was working with Robin van Roosmalen, and there was some footage of them trash-talking each other while they were sparring at... is it Black Zillions he's at? Can't remember which, but that's also a good call, because Robin van Roosmalen's whole game is heavy low kicks from in close. And if you watch Justin Gaethje, one of his big damage dealers is this really hard right low kick. He'll occasionally throw it as a jab, like he'll sorry, not as a jab, as a counter to the jab or whatever. He'll put his gloves up, take the jab on them, and as the opponent's retracting into their stance, he'll punt the leg. Great time to buckle that lead knee in. Anytime it's sort of off the floor, moving towards you or away from you, that's when you can hurt it. The other time he's really good with it is against the fence. And this is where a lot of Gaethje's best work happens. You'll notice that he often has, like, if you watch the highlights of him, just watch the highlights alone, because, you know, they're amazing. But a lot of the time he'll have his left hand on the opponent, either single collar tie or just stiff arming them straight back into the fence. And he'll be swinging with his right hand or low kicking with his right leg. He hits these amazing clinch low kicks. Anderson Silva used to throw him, like, you know, you have a collar tie and you throw the low kick as the opponent's dropping their hips back away from you or moving or whatever. And they're really good because you can, if you can off balance the opponent or keep them moving or keep them flat on their feet, you know, it's a position where they're going to really struggle to pick the leg up and check. Anderson Silva used to use them occasionally, but Gaethje's straight up drop dudes with them. He mauled Palomino with them. And those are going to be interesting against Johnson, because Johnson's got good low kicks in his own right, and he does check them quite well. But if he can get the clinch on him, maybe he can put him in a position where he's not thinking about the low kicks. What I like about Michael Johnson is that he doesn't have a huge toolkit. You know, it's the straight punches, the step up inside low kick, or the rear leg low kick, and that's about it. He doesn't really do an awful lot, but he is quite adaptable in the strategy he puts forward to apply that. If you watch him normally, he's moving around the ring, floating. He'll throw a couple of punches and then immediately he'll circle round to wherever he wants to be next. And he's very rarely in one place for very long. Unless Khabib's on top of him, pushing his arm up his back. But most of the time he's moving. But if you watch him against Edson Barboza, he's complete flip of the switch. You know, he's up in Barboza's face constantly. Anytime Barboza kicks, he's immediately in on him, punishing him for kicking. And that's how you got to fight Edson Barboza, and he did it wonderfully. So I'm really interested to see that fight, because Michael Johnson is, if you asked me as matchmaker to the UFC, which is a job that I might pursue when I'm retired, but then I wouldn't really be retired. Yeah, anyway, if you asked me to find him the worst matchup for Justin Gaethje coming into the UFC, I would pick Michael Johnson from that division, to be honest. Or just, you know, because he's one of the best lateral movers and straight hitters, and he deals with low kicks well. You know, there's three things that are really going to bug a guy who wants to walk forward, put you to the fence, swing wild at you, and doesn't really have great defense. And the left straight to the body is going to be really important, because Gaethje puts his forearms so high so often. But this is the sort of thing that they tend to like to do with those outside champions. If you asked me to do the same for Eddie Alvarez when he came in from Bellator, it's hindsight is everything. But if you said, like, Eddie Alvarez is a fairly stocky lightweight whose real strong points are his right hand, and he likes to dig to the body with that right hand, likes to level change a lot, I would say, let's put him in with a gigantic guy who low kicks a lot, keeps the range well, and hits intercepting knees all the time. Donald Cerrone. But then that's how these things work. It's the hardcore alternate MMA fans being like, I want to see he's going to run through the UFC, blah, blah, blah. And it's the Zuffa zombies being like, Nah, wait till he meets proper competition. The way it works, obviously, is that, and I'm going to say this about anyone in the UFC, anyone in any top 10 in the UFC can beat a handful of guys in the top 10, will probably lose to a handful of guys in the top 10. It's hard to be consistent in this sport, especially in a division as deep as lightweight, where there are guys with every different kind of skill set you can possibly name. So unless he gets KO'd horribly and retires, wouldn't write off Gaethje if he loses this fight, because for every Michael Johnson that he meets, there's a guy like Anthony Pettis or Edson Barbosa, guys who on paper you would think would be paralysed by this guy's forward movement, wrestling and power. And what can happen, as always, is that guys can like Anthony Pettis or Eddie Alvarez lose the first fight in the UFC, everyone goes, oh, hype train derailed, and then they come back, put together some wins and win the title. You know, consistency in that division is so hard. And I said this the other day on Twitter, someone said, Khabib's unproven, blah, 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 Tony's the clear number one contender. I said the champion's unproven at that weight. You know, Conor McGregor's fought 3 top lightweights. One of them was at featherweight. In fact, 2 of those fights against one of them were against 170 pounds. So he's had one true lightweight fight against a world-class lightweight. Just happened to be the champion. He just happened to beat him. The hard part, and one of the reasons that you'll always hear me say really good things about Rafael dos Anjos' run to the title, is beating those top guys consistently. So few guys can do it, and that division is constantly changing because of it. You know, I have a very hard time considering the champion a champion if he's not consistently fighting these guys, which is why I consider Tony Ferguson pretty much the most proven lightweight in the world right now. That's not to say he's the best. You know, he could get in the ring with either Conor or Khabib and lose. He could get in the ring with someone in like below the top 10 and lose. That's the way the division goes. Anyway, let's do some other stuff because we're getting caught up on this. Juliana Lima versus Tisha Torres. Oh, that'll be a barn burner. Tisha Torres, fun enough striker, but I just can't forgive her for that awful... was it Angela Hill? The fight where she just spent the whole time with the shoulder pressure in half guard doing nothing. And Juliana Lima, everyone hates her, so, you know, won't go into that too much. Jared Cannonier, keep an eye on him, because he's a solid boy. He achieved boy status by boxing up Glover Teixeira. Lots of people seem to think that fight was a massacre. Go back and watch it. Any time that they're on the feet, he just lights Teixeira up. And then he gets taken down a lot, but he does a decent job of scrambling back to guard each time. My boy Elias Theodorou is taking on Brad Tavares, who I remember had really good takedown defense. But then Gray Maynard versus Truto Ishihara, the meme lord. Mark Jacasey, I don't think I mentioned him last week. Mark Jacasey, very promising fighter. In against an undefeated guy with a couple less fights than him. Drakkar Klose, which sounds like Dolph Lundgren's name in any film where he's the bad guy. But Jacasey, yeah, he's interesting. Apparently he ACL'd the last guy he fought. There was a side kick and you watch the guy sort of stumble and then the guy starts running forward and that's when he gets countered. That low line side kick is one that will make people come to you because that's the danger. You say, stay there and I'll just keep stamping on your knee, and then they have to start moving in and it opens up counter opportunities. Or they'll stay back and you can put them to the fence as McGregor did to Holloway. Jessica Eye versus Aspen Ladd. Aspen Ladd 5-0. Ooh, don't know much about her. Jessica Eye, nice jab. Not much else. Like, she doesn't really put it in with her game at all. She's got a lot of potential, but I think she probably needs to just focus on boxing sparring and try and put that jab on top of some other stuff. Because she got boxed up by, well, not boxed up, but she got outpunched by Miesha Tate, of all people, whose boxing is horrible. Or was horrible, you know. Retired now. Ambassador for the sport. Then you got my girl Angela Hill versus Ashley Yoder. Don't know much about Ashley Yoder, but I know I like Angela Hill. She did a great job against Jessica Andrade. In fact, she laid the groundwork for the Joanna Jędrzejczyk victory over Jessica Andrade. In fact, I would say if they had a rematch and, Angela's team were religiously going through the tape going, don't do this. The things like stepping in deep with the right hand, those were the things that allowed Andrade to catch her. Using the long left hand and the long right hand and the occasional intercepting knee, the right low kick from way out of range. Those were all things that Joanna Jędrzejczyk used after that. And they basically got her away untouched in those exchanges. Angela Hill, that is. It was really just the stepping in deep to try and hit with power that got her in trouble. And then Ed Herman versus CB Dollaway, which is way down the bottom of the card. Two old vets there. Yeah, not a bad card, actually. I was looking at it last week going, Jesus, how am I going to write about any of that? But now I realise that we got these 2 cards this week, and I'm actually pretty psyched. Right, quick plug, then we'll do some Facebook questions. If you are not already a Patreon boy, that allows me to do this podcast. It allows me to stay independent and not sell this to Vice or anyone like that, not have any sponsors, and just allows me to do this comfortably each week. And if you are a Patreon boy, I put out a history lecture each month, which is normally like an hour. I think this one was closer to 2 hours, to be honest. It took a long time to edit down. We've been doing the history of the heavyweight title in boxing, but I wanted to step away from that this week after hearing that Sakuraba was, not this week, this month, after hearing that Sakuraba was going into the UFC Hall of Fame. Sakuraba was one of the guys who got me into MMA. I would say he's probably my biggest influence. Not on my game, I don't just roll for Kimuras all the time, but like one of the men who inspired me the most. So I put together this. It started out as an exploration of Kazushi Sakuraba, but it became all about the Pride 2000 Grand Prix, which is the openweight Grand Prix. And there's all sorts of stuff in there. We talked about the Gracie Sakuraba rivalry. We talked about Hickson and Takada. Hickson basically. Everyone forgets that Hickson was fighting in 2000. If he'd have gone to the, having watched him the other day, I was watching the Takada fights the other day. Takada goes 9.5 minutes in the second fight and drops Hickson with a knee from the clinch. Also, Hickson can't take him down in the clinch or out in the open. Hickson has to pull guard, and it relies on Takada jumping for a leg lock and pulling Hickson into mount by accident. Hickson got pretty badly beaten up by Takada in the early going of that fight. If he'd have fought any of these guys in the Grand Prix, which took place a couple of weeks before his last fight against Funaki. If he'd fought Sakuraba, Igor Vovchanshin, Mark Coleman, Mark Kerr, dude had been murdered. Anyway, so yeah, we got all that stuff. You got Mark Kerr and his drug issues. You got Mark Coleman and his losing streak heading into poverty throws a fight to Takada. You got Hoist Gracie and you got Sakuraba and you got Fujita. And all sorts of other stuff going there. Gary Goodridge had a good rant about the K1 matchmakers. That's one of my pet peeves. Fucking hate those guys. As I said, if I would happily let my car roll over the guy who made Gary Goodridge's matches in K1 because it's the most exploitative shit you've ever seen. There was no reason that he should be getting knocked out by Jerome Labana. There was no reason that he should be getting knocked out by Jerome Labana a second time when he'd beaten no one. Anyway, so sign up to the Patreon, get in on that, because I was well proud of the episode I put up this week, last week, whenever, the Sakuraba episode. And I just love hearing your suggestions and feedback, and I'm playing with the idea of what to do next. Could continue with the heavyweight title thing. Could go further back and do like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Luta Livre stuff. We've got all sorts of ideas here. Give me a shout if you've got an idea for it. Anyway, let's do some questions. We're going rapid fire on Facebook today because I haven't done that in a while. Does Conor McGregor's karate stance have any effect on his fight against Mayweather? From James. No, I suspect that he'd lose either way. No, longer stances are the norm in boxing, especially for someone like Mayweather. He's almost side on. You want to blade your body so that you've got as little hittable target area as possible, which you don't really see that much in MMA because more like Muay Thai style stuff, the narrower you stand, the more likely you are going to be knocked over by a kick or something like that. Chang says, overall, do you think it's harder for a grappling-based fighter to learn striking or the other way around? Well, I came from striking to grappling, so I'm always going to say that. I wrote about this today in my tactical guide to Yoel Romero versus Robert Whittaker, plug for later. Wrestling and striking at the highest levels have a lot in common. It's when you are down the lower levels of one that you look like a robot. You see a lot of wrestlers come in, pumping out this awkward jab that does nothing and then throwing an awkward right hand or winging the right hand. But when you see someone like Daniel Cormier or Yoel Romero who take to it very well, it's because they realise that a lot of it is just feinting, getting the other guy out of position for when you want to step in for real. And that's true in wrestling and in striking. And to be fair, you could extend it onto the ground. Get mount, put your hand in the collar, that's a feint, basically. And, if they ignore the feint, you can then start working the other hand in the collar and ruining their day. If they bite on the feint, you can start moving for the armbar. It's just the same principles, different techniques. But I think it's probably easier in an emotional sense, learning to grapple first and then coming into striking because you're going, wow, I love this stuff. Or if it ever gets bad, I can grapple. Whereas if you're a striker going to grappling, you're going, shit, everything I've learned for the last X years has been useless. And then even when you start getting passable at grappling, you're still like, can't open up too much with my striking or he might take me down. Robin says, do you see leg locks, especially heel hooks, becoming a much more viable threat in MMA, seeing how they are exploding on the BJJ scene? Not on the BJJ scene, just on the sub-grappling scene. They're keeping them out of the anything IBJJF, aren't they, at the moment? Because basically Brazilians will lose if you allow them. No, leg locks are great, are a huge deal, should be looked into further. Guys like the Danaher Death Squad have been lighting guys up with it just by... What Danaher does is he breaks everything down to the smallest parts and has guys drill through it constantly, like his back control stuff. It's get this hand, force it to there, do this, trap it behind his back. And it's the same finishing sequences over and over again and logical progressions on the attacks. I was hearing someone went to one of Gordon Ryan or Nicky Ryan, one of them gave a seminar and they did a Q&A, and Gordon or Nicky, whoever it was, said that they don't even catch most of their teammates in leg locks anymore because they've drilled them so much. Most of their game in the gym isn't leg locks at all. So I think there's probably diminishing returns once you understand it really well and if you're dealing with it every day. But I think there's tons of room for it to take off in MMA, especially the inside Sankaku and stuff like that. It's the leg reaping, the classical reap for like the outside heel hook, tends to be one of those ones that can get really messy without any friction, with sweaty legs and just shorts. But if you watch Eddie Cummings, he's hitting that inside Sankaku constantly, and he doesn't wear any like spats or anything, just wears shorts. Tom says, as a request, any chance you'll break down the other GPs? Oh, Grand Prix, Pride, Heroes, K1. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed this one. I love tournaments because there's always something crazy going on. The best fighter in the world is very rarely the best tournament fighter. And with tournaments, you've always got dropouts and all sorts of other things going on. Whoa, time is flying by, so let's get back to the event this weekend. UFC 213, Nunes versus Shevchenko, but that's not really the one that everyone cares about. The one that everyone cares about is Whittaker versus Romero, but there's a lot of good fights on this card. Let's start at the top, actually. Amanda Nunes versus Valentina Shevchenko 2. Interesting fight because Amanda Nunes is now in that position where everyone's like, well, having been like Ronda Rousey was overrated, they are now like diving in on the Amanda Nunes train hard, Pretty basic fighting, relies on her low kicks, her strong right hand, good one too, and strong counter wrestling. And against Valentina Shevchenko, the first time she relied on taking her down and ground and pounding her. Of course, in the first fight, she really faded quite hard towards the latter half of the second round, and Shevchenko really started taking over, hitting some nice trips and things, nice spinning back fist, and then she did a nice front headlock knee off a takedown attempt. On the feet, obviously, because you can't knee someone in the head on the ground with a front headlock, which is one of the saddest things in the world of MMA. Mark Schultz said that if knees to the head on the ground are allowed, the front headlock is the be-all and end-all of MMA. I think you know what the plan for both is there. Nunes is going to want to nuke her fast, probably take her down and ground and pound her right at the start. Valentina Shevchenko is going to try and extend the fight over the rounds and box her up, or kickbox her up, rather. And I think the way that it looked in the last fight was if there had been 2 more rounds, that would have been Shevchenko's fight. But there weren't, and she was probably only preparing for 15 minutes, so you can't really use that sort of logic in this fight. However, Nunes' problem has always been gassing. Against Kat Zingano, she gassed hard, and Zingano was just suplexing her by the head. I think it's called a head pinch, but just ragdolling her around. I'd love to see Zingano work her way back to the top, because she was probably the most entertaining wrestler / ground and pounder in any women's division. And she matches up especially interestingly with Nunes, because she can take a beating early on, and then she will come back and maul you. Anyway, that'll be interesting at least. Curtis Blaydes versus Daniel Omielanczyk. Is that it? Omielanczyk? Yeah, well, looking forward to that. I do like Curtis Blaydes. Interesting up and comer. It's actually, I'm noticing this more in the heavyweight divisions. There are guys like Tabura, who I'm not like, heavyweight up and comer. I'm sort of like, heavyweight up and comer. Back in the old days, it used to be 20-year-old heavyweight, and you go, well, they're not going to be any good. But there is this move now that all these guys like Andrei Arlovsky are moving out of the picture. We're finally getting some young heavyweight talent. Having said that, we got Fabricio Werdum versus Alistair Overeem 3. If you saw Alistair Overeem if you saw the second fight, you'll know that Overeem can stuff his takedowns very easily, but Werdum was just moving into that stage where he was confident in his striking. He was in that middle stage where he just triangled Fedor, and he was convinced that he could get everyone to jump into his guard and lose there. And then when Overeem did go into his guard, he didn't do anything. He's probably not going to submit everyone from his back. But he's realised that now, so it's all 1-2s and step up left kicks and wheel kicks and double collar tie knees is Verdum's whole game. Aggression is Verdum's whole game. There was this thing after the Stipe fight where everyone was like, "Oh, he ran in wildly," but he does that in every fight. He's been a guy who's been sparring with Wanderlei Silva and all those other guys who just swing wild from the start. And what you learn with that sort of sparring is to get aggressive and get on the front foot so that you're not going to be taking a pasting for the rest of the round. It makes you wonder how new Econoreem is going to match up against him. I would like to see Overeem working the clinches more, because the great example is always Fabricio Werdum versus Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira 2. Nog worked him over pushed against the fence for a while. Cain Velasquez struggled. Werdum was able to just break off and get his double collar tie and break his hips out and get out, Demetrius Johnson style, but not with the same sort of level of technique. Cain Velasquez doesn't have great knees. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira doesn't have great knees. If you do have great knees, the clinch along the fence is a really powerful position for you. And Overeem has some of the best knees I've ever seen in MMA. He just doesn't really use them enough. But he went to them against Mark Hunt and really hurt him. Got him a couple of times good in the body and then caught him in the head, which is one of the advantages of being quite a tall heavyweight. It was more of an advantage when he was a tall light heavyweight. He could pick his knee up to like his belly button height and catch guys in the head. This is only a 3-rounder again, which is a bit of a pain in the arse. You shouldn't have guys of this caliber fighting 3-rounders. But, it is what it is, as my good friend Max Holloway would say, and they're just going to have to deal with it. Unfortunately, it can make it more of a points affair if you've only got 15 minutes as opposed to 25 minutes to work in. However, heavyweights over 25 minutes tends to get ugly. For Werdum, I'm not going to say, tighten it up and don't use the aggression. I'd say use the aggression, because Overeem likes distance. He likes to limit the exchanges, and he does that because he doesn't like getting hurt. He's been knocked out so many times now. He's aware of that weakness, physiological or whatever. I think Werdum should just stay in his face from the get-go. Don't even worry about the takedowns. Just get up in his grill, kick him lots, punch him lots. If you can draw the kick, the Econoreem kicks, he likes to step, circle round, get into that southpaw stance, and then throw the left kick to the body. If you can draw it, take it on the forearm and get in on him after that. The Johnson versus Barbosa strategy would work great. Just keep stepping in on him, hitting him with straights, pushing him to the fence, without actually wrestling him against the fence. For Overeem, I would, the knees in the clinch is a great one. Foot sweeps. Love those. Great way to sling a guy to the mat, get the points for it without having to jump into his guard. And if you hit him good, you can get past the guard straight away. I can't remember if Strikeforce had lifted their ridiculous ban on elbows the first time these guys fought, but elbows from the clinch are always a good option, and if he does get into the guard, it could make it more interesting. However, elbows may have been allowed the first time, and they just had a boring exchange in guard anyway. So I'm cautiously optimistic for that one. I hated their second fight so much. But Werdum was in that really weird phase of getting my guard. I'm hoping that his new confidence in his striking and his acceptance that getting guys to jump into your guard doesn't always work will make this a more interesting fight. Who else we got on the card? Travis Browne versus Oleinik. That's a really clash of styles matchup. I suspect I'm probably not alone in not giving a shit about any of the other elements of Oleinik's game except for the Ezekiel choke. The guy's got like 10 on a 50-60 fight record. It's incredible. And he scarf-holded Krokop into submission too. But everything else about his game, really not great. He's not going to be the next big thing at heavyweight. But, Travis Browne is at the stage in his career where this is the sort of fight he's in, which is a terrible shame because when he burst onto the scene, he was one of the most promising heavyweights in the world. And I think that he's been let down by his coaches and let down by the style that he uses. He's got great kicks, powerful kicks, good punches, not the best boxing in the world, but he's been working exclusively with a boxing coach and only gotten worse, really. All he does now is load up big uppercuts, throw out occasional jabs, and get beat up. A return to kicking lots would be great without like the crazy jumping that caused him to injure his own leg against Antonio Silva. But as a heavyweight goes, I believe he's fairly young. He's going to be like 30-something. So there's always time for a turnaround. If you haven't watched that Thank You Edmund video in a while on YouTube, I recommend going watching it in preparation for this fight. I mean, he wasn't perfect when he was down at Jackson Winklejohn. He got beat up by Fabricio Verdum while he was down there, just basically because he was loading up on one big punch at a time and didn't really have the technical striking acumen of a guy who was going to be challenging for a heavyweight title. That was the number one contender fight, wasn't it? But he was getting better there, and he was surrounded by quality training partners. Down at Edmonds, I don't know what he's doing. I'm assuming he's still there. But the big fight of the night is Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero. If you haven't read my tactical guide to this, go over to Vice Sports, it's on there. But this fight's so interesting to me because I considered Jacare as something of an indicator as to whether Whittaker would be able to deal with Romero. They're very similar in that they rely on their big power and athleticism. They both... neither of them is technically very sharp, but they get by. And they're strong enough and fast enough that they can just batter dudes. And the times that you'll see technique win out are not in short fights, they're not in hurried fights, they're in longer fights where you can draw guys out and pick at them. Whittaker got the finish in the second round of the Jacare fight, but it was, he'd started early with the just simple point fighting, the fake jab, real jab, poking him with little annoying techniques, which is the difference between someone like Whittaker and someone like Jacare or Romero, who don't do half measures. Everything they do is a loaded up punch or a big shot. They're there to knock guys out, and they don't really appreciate the value of something like the jab or the front kick to the body. If you watch the Jacare fight, Whittaker throws 4 or 5 really good ones, digs them in right into the solar plexus. And a couple of them, as he's on the back foot, and it basically turns Jacare around. He's like, okay, I don't want to chase you anymore. But the impressive thing in that fight was Whittaker's takedown defense. A lot of that was distance. He did actually get taken, dragged to the fence and taken down at one point, and he got up and scrambled out. But most of what was keeping him safe in that fight was his management of distance. And there's a few gifs in my old Whittaker Jacare article, Precision Over Power, that's the one. But Whittaker would flick in the jab, immediately get down behind his lead shoulder in anticipation of the booming right hand, and then he'd step back in with a feint or something, and Jacare would immediately shoot, and he'd just sprawl on him from like a mile out. He was very good at convincing Jacare to go for stuff that he wasn't really close enough to pull off. And I think that's the sort of thing that he can use against Romero quite well, because Romero is the kind of guy who will leap for you, sometimes literally with a knee, but he'll reach for you, he'll run for you. When he wants to attack, he decides he wants to attack. I feel like the technical difference could be exploited by a guy like Whittaker with his distancing. However, Yoel Romero's game he's pretty unpredictable in terms of which strikes he's going to throw, but the pattern is largely the same. He walks forward pressuring guys, does a good job of keeping them along the fence, and if they throw something, he'll step back, let them lash out, and then move back in. Bit like Mark Hunt against Derek Lewis the other day. The way that can be exploited is that basically his only answer to anything is to step back and then come back in afterwards. The times he's been tricked are a couple of really good examples from Rafael Feijoa, very old fight, but Tim Kennedy showed the same thing, didn't exploit it quite as well, but the side, Romero's side of it was there, even if Kennedy's side wasn't as good as when Feijoa did it. But Feijoa would flick something out or step towards him, Romero would step back, Fei Zhao would stop, and Romero would go, okay, I'm done retreating. And as soon as he started stepping back in to close the distance and start pressuring again, Fei Zhao would chuck in a right kick to the body. Really nice. Kennedy caught him a couple, but it was sort of by accident. Kennedy was doing the thing where you, like, if you just go straight at Romero, you know, you go jab, jab, kick or whatever, he's just going to back straight up twice, 3 times, you know? Like, the secret is to go jab and then, you know, take that beat and let him come back in and then kick him. Or punch him. It's those simple timing things that are matters of experience. You know, you can take to the game like a duck to water, which is, you know, what Romero has been doing with striking. But there's those little subtleties that you don't really learn over such a short period. And a lot of guys don't ever learn. That gives me some hope for Whittaker in this match, because he is the smaller man, and the wrestling is going to be a real hassle for him. And the power of Romero is just ridiculous too. And the speed, actually. He's just everything you could want athletically from a fighter, and he's 40 years old. But Whittaker's use of cadence and timing has been fantastic in his previous fights. That faked jab to jab, or the jab where you stop halfway and then you complete it a beat later. Whittaker's been catching dudes with that since he got into the UFC as a welterweight. I'm going to say read the article to get more of my thoughts on that one. One of the interesting ones I thought of was Whittaker. Something you'll notice about Whittaker, he did it a lot more at welterweight, but he was doing it against Jacare too. He'll have the lead hand low in what some people call the Philly shell, I call the Stonewall. There's other names for it, can't remember it off the top of my head, but basically lead hand low with you ready to roll behind your shoulder. Whittaker and occasionally Junior Dos Santos do this. By having that lead hand low, when the opponent shoots for your hips, you already have an underhook in position, but you need to stiffen it up, otherwise you're just going to get your hand sucked into your waist as your body locked and taken over. But that it's there. You have put it in a position where you have a head start on the race to your hips. And it's really helped him against guys like Jacare. And it meant that he could do this thing he was trying against Jacare, where he'd shoulder feint with the lead shoulder, as if to jab, but keep his hand low. And Jacare would step in to either clinch or duck in on the hips. And Whittaker would try and uppercut him with the right hand. He didn't quite get it in that fight. He tried it about 3 times. But that's something that he likes to try. And by having that lead hand low, what someone like Romero can do is go in for the hips. As soon as that hand turns outwards, stops being a shoulder roll position and starts being an underhook position, that shoulder's coming away from the jawline, and that's when you can spring back up and hit him in the head with the right hand. Against Jacare, he seemed aware of this, so he was circling out towards the left hand, but both his hands were down. It's like we were talking about Stipe Miocic against Junior Dos Santos, anything like that. When you can keep a guy wrestling and he's leaving the clinch, he's circling out of the clinch, but his hands are still wrestling, that's when you can lamp him in the head. So nice shots into left hooks and shots into right hands would be a great look from Romero. And low kicks from both, to be honest, because if you can take the explosivity out of Romero, and he does step right back immediately after any attack, so he puts himself right on the edge of the reach so that you can try and catch him inside the lead leg. And for Romero, if he can punt Whittaker's legs, he can take some power off the left hook, which is really Bobby Whittaker's money punch. And that's what I like so much about Robert Whittaker. He's a guy who has the massive knockout power in the left hook. He's starched dudes outright with that, but he's invested so much in landing lots of other strikes. He does so many other things, and then that Sunday punch, the left hook, is just something that's there in case. If the opening's ever there, if he ever catches it, there's a good chance he'll put the guy to sleep. Anyway, great fight. Go read the article. Let's do a few more questions from the Q&A, because I only put it up at the start of this episode and now loads of people have commented. Edgardo says, could you delve into the analytics used in MMA with the emergence of Fightmetric LLC, Fightnomics, game trees employed by Greg Jackson, etc.? What is the state of analytics in MMA? It's good. Guys are counting almost everything. Guys love figures. The one that really makes me laugh every time they bring it up on UFC broadcasts is We're still working out which ones matter. Obviously, in American football, very stat-based game. You have all these stats that you can pull up, like running yards and passing yards and all that shit. And baseball too. Everyone wants to moneyball MMA, but we're still working out which ones are actually useful in MMA. Because, like, I remember in one of the Diaz-McGregor fights, they pull up time spent advancing, and the total time between both men didn't add up to 50%. So more than half of the fight, neither man was advancing. I don't understand that. That's just a completely useless statistic, because if it isn't as obvious as it should be, or as you would think, then what's the point in announcing it? It's just something for Mike Goldberg to read, and then he didn't say anything useful about it afterwards, I think it's just something that Americans love on their broadcasts. Fightnomics, my boy Reed, I read his book, really good fun. There are lots of interesting little statistical trends and things in MMA, which are quite fun. Fight Metric is great, but also it kind of just, everyone just goes on it the next day to check if they were right about the decision that they think was wrong. And as much as judges are shit in this sport, they can't literally count every punch. Because if you're on a monitor, you're looking at a camera from one angle. If you're by the cage, you're looking at the fight through a cage. I don't know, if you've ever been cage side, literally cage side. I mean, I've been in press seats, but the judges are literally next to the cage. And the cage is obscuring half your view. So yeah, lots of room for analytics, but I don't, it kind of bugs me when guys want to moneyball this. Well, every trend you look for in MMA is about one fighter. You can say, okay, he's fought X number of southpaws, he's fought X number of orthodox, he's dealt with X number of kicks, he's not checked this many low kicks, blah, 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 in each of his fights. It's very hard to make large generalizations about a sport when every single aspect of it is an individual matchup between two individuals. Gildas says, whatever you have to say about this Unified Weapons Master links me to Unified Weapons Master. I think it's interesting. I mean, I'm always interested in watching guys do this stuff, like the Dog Brothers and shit like that. Trying to work out a way to spar with weapons that is realistic to what the weapons would be. Isn't stick fighting supposed to be like a substitute for machetes? And you see guys just grabbing the sticks and doing all sorts of stuff. Stick chokes, that's what the Dog Brothers are into. I'm always up for sparring and testing things, but unless there's actual cutting and bleeding in something, you can't say, okay, this guy has a staff and this guy has a sword, but it's represented by this, shiai or whatever, training sword. I've seen a lot of arguments about the point systems, and it's mainly because of that. If I smacked you on the arm with a big stick, I could break your arm if I'm lucky. If I smack you on the arm with the sharp end of a blade, it's probably going to cut your arm open. What I do love is like things like M1, the night combat and shit like that. A lot of it falls back to the throwing. If you wear a ton of armor and you're basically just hitting each other with swords that have become bats at that point, throws become far more important. David Ola says, how long does it take for a fighter to develop? There's no full stop on that, so he could have been wanting to type more than that. A fighter is a work in progress until, well after his athletic prime. So guys are still learning things when we're all going, please get out of the ring, you're going to die there. So I'm sure that guys like Diego Sanchez and Andrei Arlovsky think that they're getting better day by day. It's just that you're dealing with a careful balance between your technical improvement and your body. Jesse says, good books every martial artist should read, and what tea should they drink while reading? Cheers. Notorious by Jack Slack, and Earl Grey because it is the only tea. Check out the reading lists we did on this channel. There's a reading list of Jack Slack's reading list on Goodreads, which someone thoughtfully puts together all the books that I mention offhand in the podcast. And it's a really good list, actually. I didn't even remember him mentioning half of them, and then I looked through it and went, oh, those are really good. Anthony says, how would you modify the rules of BJJ to make it more self-defense / MMA oriented? Why do you think the best grapplers in MMA come from ADCC? If you compete at the highest levels of ADCC, you are competent with no gi, with the sweat, which makes everything different, and no handles. However, most of the best guys in the world, most of the guys who compete in ADCC with the odd luta livre or wrestler or judoka, most of them Actually, judoka count, because most of them train with the gi most of the time. The only thing you can do to make your BJJ more more oriented to anything without the gi is to rely on the gi less. But that is a mixed bag, because when the other guy starts grabbing your pant legs, you want to go, okay, I'm going to stick this hand inside your collar or threaten to loop choke you or whatever. So the more the other guy uses the gi, more you get dragged into using his gi. But I think self-defense is a dangerous thing anyway, because for every, Ryan Hall had a good rant about self-defense. If I'm learning to deal with the grips and awareness of a really good judoka, when some bum grabs me on the street, I think I'll be able to rip his grip off or whatever. I was reading something about this the other week too, someone complaining about the meows and how they're not real jiu-jitsu, and Helio would be spinning in his grave. And I'm like, Helio Gracie spent 90-minute matches in a gi looking for cross chokes from closed guard. The idea that he was some kind of street fighting, only ever cared about the Helio filter that they're now selling, is laughable. In fact, I believe against Kato, he basically got the cross choke while Kato was passing his guard. But, self-defense is the thing that people sell now. So, the best self-defense is to learn 4 punching combos, learn how to headbutt, learn the basic escapes from jiu-jitsu, and spar often. That's your self-defense right there. And try and rely on underhooks and overhooks and not too much on the gi. But when are you going to be attacked by a naked dude? Nika says, who are your favourite fight analysts? It says analysists, but that sounds like some kind of cyst. Who do you read or listen to on a regular basis? What's your opinion on Heavy Hands, Dan Hardy, Robin Black, Dominic Cruz, etc.? Crap, all crap. No, I love all those guys. They're great. I don't listen to or read much unless I don't write about something. I've not written about Nunes versus Shevchenko. And I'm looking forward to reading what other people wrote about that. I don't like reading things because, before I've written my stuff, because I want what comes out in my analysis to be, or rather my articles or whatever, to be what I see in these fighters before I've absorbed what other people have said about them. I'm not like a student scared of plagiarizing by reading, but I do feel like, shit, I just dissed the Helio filter, and I'm about to say everyone has their own sort of filter based on their own experience, and I'm going to be much more valuable if I give you my fresh look on it, as opposed to if I've checked out everyone else's stuff, and then I write mine after I've read all of this, But you can't go wrong with any of those guys. They're all really good analysts. I don't even like calling myself an analyst, but if we're going by that name, then yes, all those guys are great. BJJ Scout, Brendan Dorman, Lawrence Kenshin, of course, my friend, Sardonic on Reddit, A Guy on Sherdog, loads of great guys out there. And there weren't when I started this. Well, they were out there, but they weren't given places to write. I didn't mean to make that sound like I started this. No, I meant this wasn't really a genre that was explored that much, whereas now it's a staple of every fight build-up. You have 6 or 7 different analyses come out, which is great. That's always what I said my goal was when I started this. I also said my goal was to write a book before I retire, and then I wrote a book, and I was like, I'm not ready to retire yet. Okay. Anthony says, what's your opinion on striking wearing the gi? I'm specifically referring to sports like Sambo, where you can grab the gi. Do you think the dynamics of striking change drastically when one can hockey fight? Do you think MMA should include a gi top of some kind for lapel chokes and hockey fighting? Perhaps you could have a sleeveless v-neck version. Do you think this would force more judo and taekwondo? No, I don't want any more clothing than is necessary in MMA. Gi grips just ruin guys' hands, basically, but also they do make for ugly striking. However, from competition karate days, guys used to grab the lapel all the time, especially back in the 70s. If you watch the JKA Cup or anything like that, point fighting, grab the collar and they don't have anywhere to run. So that was Yahara's trick. then guys started like twigging to it, and what you do is, I don't know if you know this about a karate gi, but it has ties at the side as opposed to a judo or jiu-jitsu gi, which is designed to just be free so that the guy can grab it. But if you undo the ties on the karate gi, the gi flies open as soon as someone tries to grab it, which is a nice little trick. But grabbing behind the tricep now guys do this all the time in jiu-jitsu, grabbing the seam just along the tricep. But if you can catch that like thumb down, like if you parry a blow and catch the gi thumb down in the back of the tricep, you can stiff arm the dude's tricep away from you, like a Marcelo Garcia escape basically. But you can start wailing on his head and kicking him basically through a blind angle. You've forced him into a position where you've got a dominant angle and he's not going to be able to turn back into you. I love that grip. It's one of those areas of combat that you don't really get to train much, but it's really cool. Kind of like anything with headbutts. I love knowing how to headbutt guys in various ground positions, like well, without hurting yourself. But it's never going to be much use to me, to be honest. Ultimatus says, how come no one shoots a real double anymore? Seems like they shoot a double leg when the opponent is against the cage, then switch to a single to drag them down. Where is the Josh Koscheck power double? I think with a better understanding of distance, generally it's going away more. Almost all takedowns that you see in the average UFC event will come off the fence. The exceptions are the really well-timed takedowns. If you time a shot perfectly so that the other guy's coming in and you're basically running through him as he does so, those are the ones that you can hit. But typically much harder to get a double out in the open in mixed martial arts today. Ryan says, of your favourite fiction authors, who would be the most formidable in a fight? Well, Hemingway boxed, always went on about it though. Norman Mailer boxed with Jose Torres, whichever is correct. Paul Gallico famously revived his career as, they were going to fire him as a sports writer, and then he said, I'll spar a couple of rounds with Jack Dempsey, and got his face torn up, because Jack Dempsey didn't spar light, ever. Yeah, there's quite a few. C. Greg says, will Conor beat Mayweather? Just kidding. What's the most important part about front snap kicks? Also, are they telegraphed by bringing the knee up? I quite like something that I learned from, what was her name? Takahashi. Gorgeous, 6 foot tall model, JKA instructor. But I've wandered into the JKA dojo one day in Tokyo and basically got a one-on-one lesson with her by accident. And she said, pull your heel up to your butt as close as possible, then just swing the knee through and let the foot unleash, just like it's swinging out. Like a whip, rather than pick the knee up and drive the foot in. And that's really changed my front kick. Can be quite labor intensive, so you got to be careful how many you use around, but quite a cool way to add some dig into your front kick. Armin says, what art should someone new to the gym prioritize in learning? Should they begin grappling, then branch into striking, or vice versa? What is the path, Jack? What is the path? I would say if you can take up both and do a couple of days a week on each, go for it. There was the old Japanese proverb, you can't chase 2 rabbits at once, but guys do better if they do. I'd say get into both and just throw yourself into as much of it as possible, because you can try and teach yourself, or you can try and make yourself do various techniques and try and learn techniques, but often it's better to just be in the situation where you're dealing with stuff all the time, and your body will gravitate towards specific techniques. Because it's not what you're doing when you're thinking that matters, it's what you're doing automatically that's going to be your go-to stuff. Florin says, is there such a thing as a perfect stance? No. If you're square, you can be hit with hit down the centre line with straights. If you're side on, you can be knocked over with kicks and sweeps. One feeds the single, one sets you up for the double. It's just, there's degrees of everything, and you've just got to be aware of what you're presenting at all times. There's a perfect stance for boxing, and Mayweather's got it, because there's such a limited number of targets. Ben says, where did you get Saku's autobiography from? It's one of his autobiographies. It's called Me, I believe, or Boku. Can't remember which. But I just got sent it by a friend. Apparently there is just an English translation floating around on the internet. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. If you're not a Patreon boy, get on the Patreon, because we've got a load of episodes up there now, which are all like an hour or more. So tons of stuff for you to listen to on the way to work. If you haven't picked up Notorious, go do it. In fact, it's on a really good offer on Amazon at the moment. In fact, I would say don't wait till September if you're a US person. Just order it from UK and pay a couple of quid for shipping. That's what I used to do with all the martial arts books that came out in the US before they came out in the UK. I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast. Send your emails to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com and I'll catch you next week. Cheers!